Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the 11 Bang Bang channel. I'm your host, Ethan Woods, and today we're going to do a video on comparing it to the original. We're going to be comparing a military heritage French AN9 musket to an original French AN9 musket. Now, some caveats here and some disclaimers. You're probably going to hear the heater running in the background. You might hear the freezer. That's all okay. But there should be some pretty good information in this video. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start our comparison. Okay, so first of all, I would like to point out that these muskets are actually not all that different. There are a few things, and we'll get into those, but so far, I've gone ahead and I've measured the muskets. They are the exact same length. So that is a big plus. And also, let's get rid of the elephant in the room, which is our missing rammer here on the original. But that doesn't really play into either here nor there. So we have our bayonet lug on the bottom of the barrel. Bayonet lug on the bottom of the barrel. I will say that the bayonet lug on the original is slightly shorter, and it's a little more squared. This one has some more rounded edges. I'm pretty sure it's because of the... they probably used a wire wheel to polish it up, and it kind of rounded those edges out. But yeah, so there is that. Also, I measured these bores out. The bore of the original measures out to around 6.96, so really almost 70 caliber. This one here actually measures out to around 6.87. So this one's closer to 69 caliber. The original is closer to 70 caliber. Also, I should mention, in the original, you see how we have this giant flared out piece right here, this funnel for your rammer? On the Indian made replicas, we just have a hole drilled right there. Also pay attention to our clips. If you look very closely, you will notice that the clips on the Indian made guns are slightly longer, a little wider. The originals are a lot more narrow and shorter. Let's move on. Alright, let's discuss our middle barrel bands here. And as you can see, the sling swivel isn't quite right on the Indian made gun. We have a screw holding the sling swivel itself in place, and that's not quite right on the original. This is the later style. On the earlier ones, it was like the 1766, where it just went and it was clamped in there and it was held in by the steel being bent into the hole itself, but these are actually riveted into place. We have the barrel band size difference, as mentioned before, and another thing I would really want you to take note of is how much thinner the original is to the Indian made gun. I'm going to go ahead and measure these right here behind the rear barrel band just to check and see how much of a difference we're really talking about here. Alright, very gently. Alright, that's from the rammer channel to the top there, and we actually come out to one inch exactly. Okay, now let's do it on the Indian made gun here, and I can already tell that there's a little bit of a difference. Here we go. So on the Indian made gun, we have a difference of 1.68. So yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there, and the further you get back to the back, the more pronounced it is. Also notice the shellac on this Indian made gun is kind of worn off. Yeah, that happens with these. Let's move on a little further. Alright, so now we're getting here to the rear barrel band, and once again, they're not too far off. Obviously this one is going to be longer because we are thicker on the stock right here, and this one is a little shorter, but I mean the width is pretty well good. You'll notice on the rear barrel band clip, this one has more of a rounded edge, like it's bending in, whereas this one is just squared off. Not a real big deal, but it is something to notice. Also, again, size difference. This one is a little more rounded off. This one's very square and long. But one thing I would really like to point out here is this little hole right here. Now, for those of you who don't know, that little hole right there is for the pin that holds in your rammer spring, your rammer retaining spring. And I don't own a Pedersoli version of the 1777 or the AN9. I guess the 1777 wouldn't have it because it actually holds the rammer. The rammer spring is actually in the front barrel band. But so I don't have a Pedersoli AN9. Some of you guys might. I have heard people say that the Pedersolis are wrong because they do not have the rammer spring. Well, I would just like to point out that this Indian-made musket, and the glare is kind of not helping, doing any favors there. See if I can kind of shield it. But you'll see it has a pin right here. And that is because this Indian-made musket actually has a ramrod retaining spring, unlike, evidently, Pedersoli. I may be wrong on that, but that is something I've always heard is the Indian-made guns never put those springs in. This one does, and it came that way. So anyhow, again, one thing I'd like to mention is our difference in stock depth here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure again, and we're going to see what that difference really is. And this time I'm going to measure from right in front of the lock mortise. So very gently. Up. There we go. Okay, so on the original we have a reading of 155. Let's go to this one. We have a reading of 1673. So basically 167. So there's that information if you want to know about it. These Indian-made guns, they do seem to be a little thicker in the belly, but we're going to talk about that in a second. Let's move on back to the locks. Alright guys, so we're here at the back end of the gun, and I'm going to point out some of the things as I notice them. And one of the main things I would like to point out to you is the mortise. This is generally the quickest way to tell the difference between an Indian-made gun and an original, especially when people really get into defarbing these or trying to sell them off as originals. I can think of one very large YouTube channel who has, quote-unquote, an original Charleville, and he's a very large YouTube channel. I'm not going to lie, a lot of the stuff he says is not true. It's kind of just stuff he probably found on Wikipedia. But he has an original, and he claims it's original. He claims it's original 1766, I believe. But the problem is the mortise looks like this right here. You see how far away that step is away from that lock on this Indian-made gun? Now the AN9, to my knowledge, is the furthest the French ever got away from this step, away from the lock. And as you can see, it's just, let me again measure it out, just so you know I'm not lying to you. So on the Indian-made gun, the step begins at roughly around 0.77, so pretty close to 3/4 of an inch away. Is how far away that one is. I'm going to do this very gently. And just to show you, this original, like I said, the AN9 is the one that usually has the mortise step furthest away from the lock. It's only about 1/4 of an inch. So remember that. If you see somebody trying to sell you a quote-unquote original, but you see this really giant, massive wood around the lock, it's probably a pretty good sign it's an Indian-made gun. Also, I would like to point out, and it's a subtle detail, and I don't even know if the camera is going to pick it up, but this drop in the comb. You see how this one is a little bit more pronounced coming down. The wrist is a little thinner. This one's got a fairly thick wrist, and by thick I mean like tall. It's not really thick, it's just tall. It needs to be cut down, in all honesty. And I'd like to point out the trigger guard. You see this one's smooth with the wood. You got your finger grooves there. This one is a little bit pronounced, and the finger grooves are pretty much the same. Now, one thing I will say about this Indian-made gun is, and it's not really wrong, but they've got the model 1777 style hammer up here. And a matter of fact, this is what I'm talking about. This is actually an original model 1779 Colonial Troop frizzen. But you can see it's a little different setup, but it has that little tiny tilt at the end of the frizzen. Here, I'll see if I can point this out to you. right there. See how that tips up? And then you'll notice on the AN9, on an actual AN9 prisoner hammer, you will see it doesn't have that. Matter of fact, it just has this very aggressive swoop going up. Really the pan is pretty much spot on. The cock, let's take a look at that. The screw looks perfect. The cock itself looks pretty well identical. Like, yeah guys, maybe we have a little bit of a difference here in the cock screw being a little further forward, a little bit. But other than that, this hole right here is a little bit on the small side. You could drill that out, it's super easy. So yeah, the cock is good. The lock plate is actually off of an older model. This is the actual model 1777 infantry musket lock plate style. You can tell because it has this little ball here on the end. And matter of fact, once again, if we look at, well, I don't know, because this is an original model 1779 made in the late 1770s, early 1780s. I don't know. I'll give that one a pass. So yeah, the lock plate's fairly decent. They got the font perfect for an Empire year lock plate. Now, once we get here to the hammer spring, the feather spring's a little bit off. You can see we have this very basic squared off shape all the way around, and then we have this very basic ball finial. Whereas if you look at the original here, we got this very nicely almost crown shaped finial. The spring is very thin. The little bevel cut right here and right here. So yeah, the spring is off. The frizzen is not too bad for an original 1777, like a pre-AN9. The trigger guard is actually pre-AN9. It's a two-piece trigger guard. This sling swivel is incorrect for any model because it's held in with a screw. Yeah, also I should mention that we have the 5-sided breech here. That is correct for post-1784 made 1777s. So I'll give them that. The buttstock shape, aside from the comb here, is pretty good. Obviously, we don't have the box pin cartouche on the Indian-made gun, but that's okay. But yeah, so that's basically it. I pointed out everything that was off about the gun and some of the things that were actually pretty good about the gun. Overall, I'm not going to lie, when you shoulder both of these pieces, I mean, I can tell a little bit of a weight difference, but really, they're not that much different. So in conclusion, how close is the Indian-made AN9 to the original? Except for the really little nitpicky things, like I said, the feeling of the gun, it feels like the original, except for one thing I forgot to mention, and that is that nubbin on the front part of the scallop is too pronounced on the Indian-made gun, hence why it hit me in the jaw and caused me to bleed. So if you were wanting to defarb one of these, you could take that nubbin down a little bit and you'd be good to go. Now, the main difference between the original and the Indian-made gun is the thickness of the stock, and you're going to hear that from a lot of people. Everything else kind of minute little things, but the thickness of the stock is the most noticeable. And that being said, I would like to mention here that that's not the end of the world, guys. Matter of fact, I'm not dogging on Pederzoli, but you cannot make a Pederzoli shortland pattern and a longland pattern historically accurate for the simple fact they make the buttstock in the rear end too small, and you don't have enough room to carve off wood to make it the right shape. But that being said, with an Indian-made 1768, which is really what it is, you can go ahead and carve it down and make it into a pretty historically accurate 1763-66. For some of you who don't recognize this gun, it hasn't really been on the channel here for about a year, but that's because it's been going through a rework defarbing process. This is actually old char, that it had that thick stock, and everything like that. But really, I replaced, and I've still got some work to do on it. I replaced the front 2 barrel bands. I kept the back one the same. And I completely recarved the stock to the correct shape for a early 1766. I also deleted the rear barrel band clip. I still need to weld it in the hole for the rear barrel band, but I went ahead and I placed a ramrod spring in this gun. I've rebuilt the lock from rifle shop parts, and just to show you what this lock looks like, check out these sparks right here. Woo! Yeah, she sparks really good. And I've still got to polish up on the front barrel band and the middle barrel band, but really, this is, aside from maybe a few little things that I'm probably going to fix here in the future, this is about as historically accurate as I can make a 1763 or 1763-66. The one thing that is a little off is the fish belly here. You'll notice that it kind of juts down there a little bit, and I went ahead and when I was inletting the mortise on the lock, I put a line right there to where it should be. And I may go ahead and delete that fish belly sometime. My biggest concern was this ramrod channel, but yeah, I actually remeasured it and looked at it, and it looks like I could shave that fish belly down a little bit, and you would never even hit the rammer channel. You can take an Indian made gun and you can generally make them look pretty historically accurate. I did put some rifle shop parts on this gun, not gonna lie, I had to spend a little extra money. But when I say a little, I mean a little, because I only spent, I think it was anywhere from $15 to $25 for the barrel bands, and I think I spent like 25 bucks on the frizz. All in all, by the time it was all said and done, needless to say, I spent like $125 for springs, because I replaced all the springs in the lock. I replaced the hammer, which this being the hammer. I replaced the 2 barrel bands, and that's pretty much it. So all in all, guys, if somebody is telling you that the Indian made guns are super far historically inaccurate, as somebody who has held originals and has held the Indian made guns, I can tell you there's a little bit of a difference, at least in the AN9. You really need to go check out Revero 311's channel, because he does the same thing but with the 1768. But with the AN9, it's not that much of a difference in my hands that I can tell. So yeah, if you want to, you can go hog wild on defarbing these things, and you can make it pretty historically accurate. So yeah, without further ado, thank you for watching. Trust in God and keep your powder dry. Bye.